Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I wanted to chat at the end of this interview with Elliot Pence about drone warfare, a little bit about our funding in Canada of defense spending. I think Elliot has done an incredibly good job of outlining how warfare has changed and how drones are so critically important in what's going on, obviously in Ukraine, Russia war right now, but also we've heard a lot about it over the course of the last week in regards to Israel and Iran. We've heard a lot about it in regards, and Elliot talked about in regards to the Arctic security, sovereignty, and border sovereignty and security. And what he points out is that military spending is changing rapidly. Defense, war, etc., is changing rapidly, and we need to be at the cutting edge of this. 2 weeks ago, we had a couple of really interesting interviews. We chatted with Peter Dickinson from Kyiv about the drone attack that Ukraine imposed on Russia. And how it was sort of the Trojan attack, the Trojan War attack via drones that were hidden in trucks that were then, trucked across Russia close to the military establishments and got underneath the air defense systems that Russia had. He also talked a lot about marine drones and how they had been incredibly effective in the Black Sea. He talked about some of the kamikaze drones, some of the fiber optic drones, and other things that are part of the warfare. These are things that people just didn't know about or talk about even, a couple of years ago. And the fact that they're ramping up what was, 100,000 manufactured drones a year to like over 1 million, if not a couple of million manufactured drones a year. War is changing. Defense is changing. Security is changing dramatically. We talked as well to Christopher Coates about this idea of a golden dome and $1 billion of expenses associated with creating effectively a new NORAD and a new military system within North America to protect both Canada and the United States, and that Canada needed to take a look at involving itself in them. And then we chatted with David Perry, who heads an organization that is a think tank in Canada looking at defense spending. So I've had a lot of shows on this issue. We even spoke with Don Wright about how we've got to think more broadly about how we use government expenditures to actually provide incentives to the right industrial activity and developments that we need, because he was bemoaning the lack of prosperity and productivity in Canada, and we needed more investment in R&D, productivity, manufacturing, etc. If we want to get out of our malaise that we've got currently in Canada. And I raise all this because I think that this week with the G7 and in the next 2 weeks with the NATO countries getting together for a major summit, we are going to be in Canada addressing this issue more than we have probably since, I don't know, World War II, or maybe the opposite debate during the desire that the United States asked us to participate in the Iraqi war, which we turned down. I think this is a major political issue and expenditure issue for the Canadian government. And I think that, you just take a look at what's happening with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the war in the Middle East that this weekend looks like it's expanded fairly dramatically. Started 2 years ago, obviously, with the October 7th horrendous Hamas terrorist attack into Israel, but then continued, obviously, with what Israel was doing in regards to defending itself and attacking Hamas in Gaza. But now has accelerated to issues in Syria, issues in Yemen, and obviously the attacks. Lebanon in the past, but also with Hezbollah, but then also, very importantly, the attacks this past weekend into Iran, which looks like it could continue for a while and is a major attack. And then we hear from our new prime minister and clearly the Secretary of Defense in the United States that China is a major geopolitical issue, and potentially their designs on Taiwan are an issue. The geopolitical world and risks associated with war have increased dramatically in the last couple of years. And we have had this commitment to NATO that we spend 2% of our GDP on defense that we haven't met ever. Now we're talking about potentially meeting it next year, and at the same time, NATO is talking about potentially increasing their commitments to 3.5% and maybe even 5% if you include some other expenditures in regards to industrial development, IT development, etc. That is somewhat defense related. This has massive increases in defense and security expenditures, but it would seem, number one, completely called for in a world that is completely different. When I chatted with David Perry last week, he said that our military in Latvia that is there as defense of the Eastern Front, potentially of any kind of Russian attack on a NATO country, would run out of munitions in 2 days. Would run out of munitions in 2 days. And that we have not replenished the munitions that we have donated, given, supported Ukraine with. That we don't have jets we've heard about. We don't have frigates. We don't have icebreakers. We don't have armored vehicles. We don't have tanks. We don't have guns. We don't have munitions. The Canadian military is in a sorry state. It's like 1/3 understaffed because of recruitment. And David Perry and Christopher Coates gave me reasons why. Some of that happened because we stopped recruiting during COVID. Well, other companies, other entities, other institutions had to recruit during COVID, and they still did. And so I can understand that maybe military training was a little bit more challenging during COVID, but other places had to do what they needed to do to make sure that they could keep their recruitment levels up, and we need to with the Canadian military. I think this has got to be one of the number one geopolitical foreign policy issues that Canada is facing. I think we need to be, as our Prime Minister supposedly said last week, and I love the quote, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. If we're not spending 2% or more of our GDP on defense, we're not at the table. And I don't want Canada to be at the menu, on the menu. So we need, from a political standpoint, to support dramatic increased expenditures in defense. Christopher Coates, David Perry spoke about how procurement is a huge issue because we've created this huge bureaucracy and red tape where numerous different ministries have to have a point of view on procurement. We need to dramatically accelerate our procurement. Not make mistakes, not do deals that we are going to come back and embarrass us, like we've heard, some people do on ArriveCan, etc. But we need to quicken up the process and get rid of the red tape. And I think we need to think about how we can make use of defense spending to assist companies, industry, intellectual property development, patents, etc., innovation in Canada. We all heard stories about the military industrial complex in the United States and how the U.S. uses that massive amount of money they spend on defense to help their businesses. Well, we should be doing the same thing. We should be demanding that a substantial amount of the monies that we spend on military, on defense, be spent in Canada to benefit Canadian jobs, Canadian manufacturers, Canadian innovation that hopefully has applicability outside of defense industries. We need to be hiring more people. We need to be training them. We need to have munitions for them. We need to have armored vehicles for them. And we need to be thinking about how war has changed and dramatically increasing our expenditure on innovation in development of and use of drones and whatever else is that next technology. Christopher Coates, David Perry, and Elliot Pence have all talked about how drones are going to go from air to water to land-based. Scary, but it sounds almost like those robots that we've seen in movies. And if this is where war is going, we need to be prepared. And we've got a long border that needs more security, more observance, more protection of, to establish our sovereignty. And I am just as worried, if not frankly a lot more worried, about guns coming south to north as Donald Trump is worried about fentanyl going north to south. And drones appear to be one of the best ways to monitor that. So bottom line, with the G7, with the NATO summits, with the Canadian political situation today, we need to tell our political leaders we want to dramatically increase our expenditures. We need to meet our NATO commitments. We need to be thinking about meeting the NATO commitments that are made that are going to be in excess of 2%. And we need to do that in a way that benefits Canada. I've dedicated numerous interviews for defense and what's taking place in Ukraine and what's taken place in Israel and Gaza. And I've got a show this week on what's going on with Israel versus Iran. I think we need to be more mindful of our place in the world. And I think we need to be very mindful of what our new prime minister said, which I think is very true. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We've got an opportunity as part of NATO, as part of the G7, to be at the table. Let's make sure that we deserve that role at the table. Let's support our political leadership, defense spending in that regard. Thanks. Good night. I remind you I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. My podcasts and videos are on my website, briancrombie.com, and I put it up on social media, on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, Brian Crombie, Radio Hour, and on podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. I've got a couple of really interesting shows this week. I've got a show with Phil Richardson talking about 12 risks, 12 major existential risks that we're facing and how we need to address them. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you on a nightly basis. Good night.